Hi there, it's January the 20th and we are continuing our journey through Matthew, and we're in chapter 13 and we're going from verses 24 to 46. Jesus is continuing his parables, what we called his mashalim yesterday, these life instructions, these life stories, life guides, not just nice sayings or pithy sayings or saws, but actually they are life instructions. And in fact, in this chapter, we note, Matthew notes that Jesus teaches the people only in parables. He teaches them in these kind of stories, in these kind of pictures, word pictures. And actually, Matthew quotes later in the chapter from Psalm 78, where the psalmist says, I will open my mouth in a parable. And the word he uses there in the Hebrew, in the original, is this word mashal, in this word that actually also means Proverbs, from the book of Proverbs, Mashalim. So Jesus continues with the agricultural theme of his picture stories, and the theme he seems to be taking here is of God's patience and of God's willingness to wait. And so he takes this picture of the field that is sown with good seed, but then the enemy comes in and sows in what is traditionally called tares or weeds. The Greek word is zizania. Interestingly enough, zizania today is a species of wild rice, but probably the zizania, the word that's used here, is talking about either darnel or a ryegrass. It's something anyway that shouldn't be there, and it's growing up with the wheat. And so the workers want to say, look, should we just go in? They say to the farmer, should we go in and tear out the ryegrass? And the farmer says, no, if you do that, you could well tear out the good crop. So hold back until the harvest, and then the whole thing will be separated out. And there's something here about God's patience, about the fact that as we're in the world, we see both good and evil happening. And again, God's patience is emphasized in Jesus talking about the mustard seed, the tiny mustard seed which is planted, probably talking about black mustard here, which grows to about 9 feet tall. So not properly a tree, but a shrub, but a tall shrub. And he says that it's worth waiting for these things because when the tiny seed grows into a shrub, it creates shelter, it creates a place for others to come. And then he also uses the picture of leaven in the bread, which is interesting because elsewhere the word leaven is used as something which is not so good. But here Jesus uses it as a good thing and says the kingdom, the God being king, is working itself through life, through the community, like leaven in a lump. So there's something very much here in the stories that Jesus is telling about this, the good seed and the tares, about the mustard seed and about the leaven, which is all about God's ability to wait. And then the disciples come to Jesus and they ask him to explain the wheat and the tares, because after all, in Jesus' time, there were those who wanted to take into their own hands the deliverance of Israel, particularly from the hands of the Romans. And so they were, in that sense, wanting to go in and rip up the bad stuff and to cause great damage. But Jesus is saying, no, we leave it in God's hands, because God is the one who will bring the final reckoning. He will bring the final judgment. Judgment is a very contentious issue perhaps today, and there are people who would want to stick to a traditional view of hell, hellfire and damnation, and others who would want to do away with hell or with any future judgment at all. But we need to remember that we all have a heart of justice. We all want to see things put to rights, and this is really what God's heart of justice is about. It's about putting things to rights. So we can't dismiss the fact that there is going to be a reckoning, because otherwise evil is allowed to triumph. So we can't say exactly what that looks like, but what we can say is that there is going to be loss and there is going to be gain. And Jesus makes that clear, that some will lose and they will suffer great loss. Others will have great joy and shine like stars, he says. So we can't downplay the fact that there is reckoning coming, but God's grace waits a long time for that day. God has patience in his waiting. And then lastly, Jesus ends up this particular reading with two stories about a merchant's finding a treasure in a field, and another one finding a pearl of great price and giving everything they have for it. When we find truth, when we find this Jesus himself, who is the pearl of greatest price, when we find this truth of God being king, it becomes worth everything we have. Everything is worth giving up for the sake of this great God, this great grace that we experience, of this kingdom that we are receiving and that cannot be shaken. Have a very good January the 20th.